This episode of The Young Turks is brought to you by Squarespace. We find out now that it turns out, I hope you're sitting, that the United States government has been lobbying on behalf of Boeing, which is a private company that makes planes, obviously, over here in the United States, mostly in the United States. And they're considered an American company, so we've been using our diplomats, our ambassadors, our State Department, etc., even the executive branch, to lobby on their behalf to make sure they get contracts from all over the world. And then there are four interesting examples that are explained in this New York Times story. Okay, and by the way, these cables have been released, of course, by WikiLeaks, and that is why we find out now, and that's why it's in the New York Times now. So first, in regards to Saudi Arabia. Oh, and by the way, this is all supposed to be illegal. These minor triflings, right? We passed a law saying that the government cannot pressure other governments to hire our private businesses, right? And that because, for example, Boeing is in competition with Airbus, which produces planes out of Europe, and they're not supposed to do it either, and the Europeans aren't supposed to pressure them, but they don't listen to that either. And in fact, one Airbus official was quoted as saying, "Commercial jet sales are not totally decoupled from political relationship building." Those are code words for, yeah, of course, we use our guys to pressure them as well to buy the planes. For example, Saudi Arabia. Currently, Saudi Arabia is trying to buy about 12 777-300ER airliners with an option for 10 more at a list price of $3.3 billion. That's going on now. I mentioned that to you just so you get a sense of the scale, $3.3 billion, and God knows what we're doing to pressure them now. But we do know about the past because of these leaks. For example, in 2006, our senior Commerce Department official, Israel Hernandez, delivered a personal letter from George W. Bush to the Jeddah office of King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia. That is when they were considering buying 43 Boeing jets to modernize their airlines and 13 jets for the personal use of the Saudi royal fleet. Okay, so that would be the Saudi royal fleet and the use of the princes and the kings, etc. for that. So King Abdullah sends a message through Hernandez back to the president. He says, quote, "I am instructing you to speak to the president and all concerned authorities. As the king, as the cable explains, as the king wanted to have all the technology that his friend, President Bush, had on Air Force One. God willing, he will make a decision that will please you very much." And then, of course, the State Department pleased him very much so that Boeing could get pleased very much in return. They have, in fact, upgraded King Abdullah's plane to be apparently very similar to Air Force One. They admit that they have, except they say we can't give you the details because of security concerns. Okay, and this is how deals get done. Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina Wazed was trying to decide whether to get Airbus or Boeing, and he asked for landing rights at Kennedy Airport. But hey, look, you find out through WikiLeaks, sometimes the government does things that are wrong, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, they assuaged his concerns. He went with Boeing, but they didn't let him land at JFK anyway. So I don't know why the airlines from Bangladesh can't land at JFK, but apparently that has not been resolved. So, all right, score one for slight honesty. Now the next story is exactly in between, right? So Turkey has apparently asked for several things from the United States in return for buying from Boeing, right? Same old story. And they say, one, they would like a Turkish astronaut to go up with NASA. I'm going to tell you whether we said yes or no to that in a second. And they would also apparently like some vague assurances that their aviation safety system will be improved to match the United States. And the person making these requests is a guy by the name of Binali Yildirim. He is Turkey's Minister of Transportation. Makes sense. And he says, quote, "Cooperation in this area will create the right environment for commercial deals." So, in other words, hey, listen, you get a Turkish astronaut up there, and you do things that you might not necessarily have done with your government, and we will buy from your private corporations, okay? And we're going to buy 20 Boeing jets, right? Now, our ambassador, James Jeffrey, ambassador to Turkey, called this, quote, an unwelcome but unsurprising degree of political influence in this transaction. Well, at least he's not surprised by it, right? And then what was the resolution? Well, our ambassador writes in, we probably cannot put a Turkish astronaut in orbit, but there are programs we could undertake to strengthen Turkish capacity in this area that would meet our own goals for improved aviation safety. In any case, we must show some response to the minister's vague requests if we want to maximize his chances for the sale. Now, I mean, think about that, right? Pause there for a second. Why is our ambassador to Turkey so concerned about the sale of Boeing? Does he work for Boeing or does he work for us? Now, the excuse, and which is partly true, is that if Boeing produces planes here in the United States for these different countries, that will create a certain number of jobs here in the U.S. They actually estimate that for every $1 billion in contracts that Boeing gets, that is the equivalent of 11,000 jobs here in the United States. Now, the State Department says that. I don't quite believe them, and I'll tell you why. With Boeing, perhaps it's X number of jobs, perhaps it's not that high, perhaps it's just that number. But when you think about it in general, for example, this is not just related to Boeing. The article also explains they do this on behalf of Caterpillar and all these other American companies. But remember, we told you last week, Caterpillar does most of its hiring now outside of the United States. So it isn't necessarily to get more jobs, it's so that Caterpillar and Boeing, et cetera, could have more profits. And their executives can then turn around and give political donations to the guys who run our government. It's partly the jobs, it's not a black and white issue, it's gray, but it's also a lot to do with, even if like Caterpillar, they're doing most of their hiring outside the US and not here, they get the favors anyway, because that's the way the system is structured. And unfortunately, that's the way our whole government is structured. Not for your benefit, not for my benefit, not for the benefit of the taxpayer as much as it is for the benefit of so-called American corporations that are in fact, of course, multinational corporations that often hire abroad and also often don't pay taxes here. ExxonMobil, for example, which we have invaded a lot of countries for, paid last year $0 in U.S. taxes when they made over $30 billion in profits. So how are they American companies? See, this is an excuse because we're now a giant corporation and our State Department and all of our government in some way or another works for those multinational corporations. This is the Borging. This is the taking over of America by corporatism. There's one more example. In 2007, Bahrain had decided to go with Airbus instead of Boeing. It was going to save them, according to these documents, $400 million to go with the European guys instead of the Americans. Instead, what we did was we lobbied their Gulf Air management, their board members, the government officials, and representative of parliament in Bahrain, and then eventually the Crown Prince himself. And eventually, we had President George W. Bush stop by in Bahrain for the first time, an American president doing that. And at that point, they signed the deal. So after they got all this that they wanted, they said, all right, we'll spend $400 million more on Boeing, who will presumably pocket most of that in profits for the executives, since apparently Airbus could do it for $400 million less and still make a profit. So their executives get incredibly rich, and our president goes and kowtows to the people in Bahrain. Because, once again, he doesn't work for us as much as he works for Boeing. Now, you tell me whether WikiLeaks has been an overall good and has been positive for journalism or not. All these things we didn't know, we had some sense of, but we didn't know the details of. Now we know a hell of a lot better, and we understand how our government has been taken over. Not by the communists like they had feared in the past, not by the terrorists or by Muslim law, as the Republicans here claim, but by the multinational corporations who pay the bills of the politicians. They can even get a president to go over there so they can make more money. And that's how this system works.
This episode of The Young Turks is brought to you by Squarespace.